Okay. Yeah. So basically looking at the state of the nation, right from the leadership, the behavior around leaders, the rhetoric around leadership, to the followers, the people's understanding of what leadership is today. You know, um, every electioneering year or cycle, I bet if you stood somewhere and asked people, what kind of a leader do you want to elect? They might give you what their mind thinks a leader should be, but in real sense, the person they end up putting in that ballot paper and into the box may not be the leader that they told you a leader should be. And so there's almost like a disease that the continent is suffering, is going through. And I'll speak that for Kenya, in that we think we know what true leadership is or what defines a good leader, but then that's not our practice, right? As someone said in this class a while back, we are attracted, Kenyans are naturally attracted to crooks for leaders. And I don't think whether we know it or not, but it's becoming a perennial disease. Yeah, every election year you think we will get it right, but we don't. But let me leave the elective politics alone, because leadership is broader and deeper. Okay. Let me talk about leadership at any level that you can talk about. Even let me talk about the nation itself and its people. Yeah. You look at the soul of the nation and you wonder, what are the statistics telling us about access to education? Have people been educated? And if people have been educated, then what is missing? What has gone wrong? Where? Right? Is it that something is wrong with education, or is it that we have this dichotomy of what we think should be done or what we know versus what actually happens? Why is that dichotomy existing? All right. It's very important that we get to ask ourselves those kind of questions. Is the country suffering from what do you call this, like from a split personality, whereby we have people who think in one way in 1 second, but in the next second they are totally different people on about any issue that you can bring forth? And where does education stand to correct that? So I'm talking about educational engagement to shape really the conscience of a nation. I would have said a continent, but I do not have data to support any claims that I might make for Kenya by generalizing them across the country, across the continent. I'm sorry, across the continent. So where are the gaps? Where are the gaps? What are the gaps in education transformation of society? I want you to listen to these two videos, and one of them is a TEDx video. The first one is not, it's just an interview by The Elephant. I'm not sure whether you guys are familiar with The Elephant. In each of the videos, I want us to listen and write down notes on the side in trying to answer the following questions. The first question is, where are the gaps in education? 2, what went wrong? Then 3, how can we fix it? 3 good questions. 1, where are the gaps in education? 2, what went wrong? And 3, how can we fix it? How can we fix it? Okay. So listen to these two videos and let me I'm not sure whether you're getting a lot of background noise from my house. I need to find a way of killing it. Are you getting a lot of background noise? Just be honest. Tell me what's going on.
No, it's okay. It's okay. There's no background noise from
Okay,
my end. There's no. Thank you.
so it's
There's none.
manageable. Okay.
Could you please project the question again that we are going to address?
Yeah, I'm just going to post the questions again. So can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, the questions are, we're going to watch these two videos. Actually, one is a little bit long. I'm going to cut it short at some point. The first one, but the second one, we can watch it in full because it's a TEDx video. So in each of the videos, I want us to discuss where are the gaps? Where are the gaps? Two, what went wrong? And three, how can we fix it? How can we fix it? You might know the professor who's being interviewed in the first video because she's an educationist and also a professor of music at Daystar University. So you may be familiar with her. So let me open this link. Okay.
As a student, you're probably getting PDFs all the time, right? A teacher might assign you a bunch of PDFs that you have to read.
Okay, let me take it back. Can you see my screen properly?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Can you hear?
No.
Can you hear the video?
No.
No, no, we can.
You cannot. You cannot hear anything.
We cannot.
Just
Okay.
waiting for the sound. We're waiting for the sound.
No, we can't. Maybe you share sound.
Okay. All right. What do I need to do? Just 1 second. Let me.
Maybe there is the sound. You click on that sound. It must be probably is mute. It's muted.
I can hear myself.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why you cannot hear. Hmm. Hmm. Let me try another browser. Can you hear? Can you hear?
No.
No, not yet.
Maybe you
Oh.
can stop sharing, then you share again. It asks you that option, share with sound.
Okay, I think it needs the microphone from the MacBook. Okay, let me try now. Sorry. How about now?
Another we are, and I'm a curator at the Advanced Info. Today we're joined by Wendy and Joanna.
Yes. Yes, now we can hear.
Now you can hear.
Yeah,
Okay. Ooh, thank
now
you.
we can hear.
All right. Uh-huh. So listen to how many of you know Prof. Wandia? Has anyone seen this face at Daystar before?
I know her.
Yes, I know her.
I've had engagements with her. I know her. Thank you.
Okay. So let's learn from her and just listen to the questions that I've posted so that as you listen, you're noting down as the gaps inherent in education will be our points of reference today. So let's listen.
A lecturer and a blogger and writer spoken matter education. And we will be looking at the education sector, asking whether the reforms that are currently not being implemented are working or whether we can work, and then we actually tackling the issues that everyone is. First question would be, so how did we end up in this situation? At independence, we were quite clear that there were three main issues, which were poverty, ignorance, and disease. Lots of those were to be tackled through education. So how do we end up from a place where we thought we had a confluence of agreement on what education would be, to here where we have different objectives for different.
I think first of all, we need to problematize the ignorance part, because I don't think Kenyans were really that ignorant. So why did we make that assumption at independence? We already had a history and a legacy and culture. And I think the thing we should have done was to see how can we build on our accomplishments so far as Africans and have an education system that reflects who we are as a people and the experiences we've had together. So that was one problem. The next one was just a philosophical problem. We never questioned what the education system was for before. And under the colonial system, education was for compliance, was for forcing compliance and controlling minds and skills. So we didn't change that. It's only now we phrased it as we are training for jobs and national development. But the underlying logic of control hasn't changed up to today, it has not changed. So that's how we have all these, parents say one thing and they think, and the government also repeat it, and we think that we are saying the same thing, but we are not saying the same thing.
They're using the same word, but
they mean different things, because for politicians, when they're saying, yes, we want children to go to school, what they are saying is it's a good way to control children because we'll be determining what they learn. It's also a way of blackmailing parents because we'll tell them, accept my policy so that your children don't have to pay school fees. But the parents are hearing, oh, my child will grow up into a good adult, they'll get a good job. So we're talking at cross purposes, and it's very difficult to get people to see that politicians are talking a different language from us.
I think it's important to kind of lay the foundation. By looking back at the colonial era, you said education was used as a means of control. Can you just expand on how that was done?
There were several things. First of all, this was the economic control. We want to run the economy and we need to train people who are going to work in that system. And when as Africans were being educated, it was only for the menial jobs and maybe the clerical ones. They were never meant to be decision-making positions. Yes. So that's the way in which they are controlling an African's ability to rise through the economy by saying you can only get education up to this level. But also it was a means of controlling ideas, because in fact they said Africans didn't need to learn African history and African art because it would give them unnecessary ideas about freedom. So you want to control their minds and make them subservient, and that was why the missionaries were allowed so much leeway in the education system, because the colonial government said, we need the skills, but we don't want these ideas to revolutionize Kenyans. And so the job of the missionaries was to make us subservient, good workers. So it's economic and mind control. It's a way of saying your ideas are not valid unless you have passed through the system.
Right. You're talking earlier about the independent schools and how exams were brought in essence, to try and control who got what opportunities or who was certified. Do you expand a little bit on this? That was interesting.
Yeah, because independent schools, you could not control what was being taught in the classroom. And so the way to control the curriculum and the teaching is by introducing exams. And that applies also now for the colonial schools, because you could have a teacher who is being paid, of course, by the missionaries, but when they get into the classroom, they'll start telling you, do you know about your ancestors? Do you know this? Have you done it? So the way to control the curriculum and what goes on in the classroom is by giving exams. And that one, it works that way because the students and the parents are now the ones who are saying, what you're telling me is good, but is it going to come in the exam? Which is the same thing that happens up to today. You have things that you want to teach, but you can't teach because the students want to know if it's coming in the exam. So that's how the colonial government now introduced the Cambridge exam. And the Cambridge was run from London.
Right.
They weren't set here. It was London. So it was a way of saying, it doesn't matter what you're taught in whatever African school, you, at the end of the day, you will be certified by one system. And the Cambridge exams were still being given in Kenya 2 years into independence, until now Kenya decided to create its own exam body. So basically the idea is that government is the one that certifies what knowledge shall be learned and what knowledge it finds useful.
Yes, and that's interesting because coming to what's happening now, to mention that is quite a lot of focus at the moment on passing the exam. And as you articulated, there are people who will insist that learning should really be about getting what you need to pass the exam. So it's important for us, I think, to understand the colonial roots of this sort of thinking. Do you think that we have reformed the system that we have from the colonial days, or is it a continuation of the colonial thinking and logic?
It's a continuation. I think the exam is the perfect example where you insist on certification according to a certain standard. So it's the same idea. It's about certifying and saying these are the ideas that are valid. But also and this is a conversation we've had on social media a lot, there's a lot of violence in the schools. Kids are beaten for not getting their multiplication tables. They are beaten for thinking on their own. One student was telling me she was punished for reading novels. You'd think that would be a good thing, that somebody's reading novels on their own, but she was punished for that by the teachers. So there's a lot of violence, even before we even start talking about the violence that the students now use when they're trying to negotiate and the teachers are not listening. So there's a lot of violence in the school system. If it's not physical, it's abuse and putting people down. So by the time you're finished with school, you have such a low self-esteem. And that is the point, so that when you become a citizen, you're a citizen who does whatever the government tells you. So it's still a very colonial system, a system of saying only these ideas are approved and only I can transmit them to you because I was given permission by the government. So even all this regulation that you have of universities is the same, is to say we are the ones who tell lecturers what they must teach, and we must always keep on inspecting to see that they are teaching the right thing. So it's still a very colonial system in operation.
I would assume some of the comeback that you get, I'm sure you face these questions on social media, would be, do we not need to certify exams? Do people not, and do we need to have exams, as I said, that test whether people have them? And don't we need to have some form of regulation that says this is the curriculum or this is what people need to know, so that we don't just have any Tom, Dick, and Harry out of school and say that I'm teaching something. Are you fundamentally against the regulation and exams, or are you saying we're doing them bad?
I'm saying we are doing them badly because, for example, exams should be diversified. We have a pipeline. What we have now is a pipeline. KCSE, KCPE, KCSE, degree, like that. And there's no other way around it. And you have to wait for the government to announce which exams are available and all that. And if you don't follow it, at some point, for example, Matiani was saying, if you got a D and you ended up in university, they would nullify your degree. So it's a pipeline. Instead of introducing different forms of certification, for example, why can't we have certification for apprenticeships, for example? Like France, they have what they call, they have a certification for craftspeople. So metal workers, designers, they get this certification and it's very prestigious. And the benefit is that now if you're a young person who is training in that field, if you learn with them, that's a prestigious thing for you. So we are not diversifying the types of certification that we can give. The second problem with the regulation mindset is that it comes from an idea of you are already doing something wrong, let us find you out. It's not saying, these are the guidelines, let's see how this can work. Let's look at the best practices, what are good things that people are already doing, how can we mainstream them? That's not the logic of regulation. The logic of regulation is that you're all doing something wrong and we are here to catch you and embarrass you. So what happens with that kind of mindset is that institutions start following the regulations instead of teaching. They're more worried about, have we followed the rules? If the government comes, will they, are they going to sanction us? So that becomes the focus instead of education.
I'm thinking about the colonial roots of the system we have. I wondered whether the role of government is outsized within our regulatory system. In the sense that if government is the one that determines what schools will teach by setting up a curriculum, for example, and setting the exam, how do we get around that? Should we be having schools setting their own exams? The sort of certifications that you speak about, of chefs and apprenticeships, that sort of thing. Should this be government certifications? Should it be trade certifications? What do you see as the role of government in education, and are we doing it wrong?
I think, first of all, I remember I used to tell the members of the Commission for University Education, why don't you tell us what is happening out there and what we need to think about, instead of just coming to tell us, ask us which rules we have followed. So I think the government is supposed, a proper government that cares for its people is supposed to give guidelines to say these are the challenges we are noticing, and and ask the universities, how do you think we can respond to them? And then talk with the universities instead of giving us rules to implement, which is the current system. So I don't think the government should be in the nitty-gritty of setting exams and curriculum and what else. They can say, these are the skills we want. This is the kind of pattern we want. And then let the schools tailor their curricula to that way. There can be peer review where schools look at which is actually the best thing, where schools and counties can look at each other's curricula, do best practices, and let the government facilitate that. And then at the higher levels, have trade organizations regulating their own professions. So you have an association of Kenyan plumbers and pipe something. And then they are the ones who set their own exams and regulate and do their peer review. And all that government will be doing is giving the guidelines of what are the basics that must be in every professional association for them to be able to certify people in their trade. And then also have professional organizations offering their own exams, let people do entry exams into university. I think the basic idea is to facilitate people, not to streamline them. And the logic right now is streamlining instead of facilitating.
Is this the same logic you see in within the current debate on overall curriculum reform, especially in the primary schools? You've been quite vocal opposing it.
Okay. I think we can stop Wandia's interview at that point. Allow me to, with her thoughts in mind, I would like for us to interrogate her perspectives first, before we can go to the other interview, or rather the other video, which is a TEDx. But just as a way of reminding you my questions, for this particular interview done to Professor Wandia Njoya, where are the gaps in education? What went wrong? How can we fix it? You can answer it in any order, but before you go there, I would like for you to respond to her very first opening statements, where she critiques missionary education. And I would like to pose a question to us, because we are talking about biblical leadership, and I think missionary education is part of that leadership in shaping the conscience of a people. But do you think, do you agree or disagree with Wandia that missionary education was sort of a tool for education control by the colonialists? Did the missionary education play in the hands of the colonial agenda to get rid of arts and other creative learnings that would make people start entertaining thoughts about liberation and revolution? Do you think that was the genius around it? Responses? Did you quite get that part? Did you get that picture? Yes, Othello. Yes, let's go Othello first, and then Paul Amata, and then we'll have Zipporah.
Thank you, Dr. She used a very interesting phrase, which I used in a paper that I published some couple of years back, subservience. I think that I agree with that aspect that it is intended for the African to be subservient to the colonial masters. And I use this in a paper. I was not talking about colonial per se, but I was talking about the leaders that will get into power. They want their followers to be subservient to them, so that they don't question what they do. And when it comes to election, our leaders, the way the colonialists set up the program is for them to inherit from what they actually started, so that they continue to take us through what the colonialists wanted us to be basically learn basic skills to serve them, not to be independent-minded, and to be able to create things for ourselves, so that the education is planned in that way. And that's what Dr. Wandia is referring to there, so that the aspect of control, so that the education is set. I don't know with the missionaries, my thinking will be, it probably must have been subconscious on the part of the missionaries, or some of them could be working for the colonial masters, so that the education is in line with what the masters think it should be. it was not intended for us to be able to get the critical aspect of education, but basic skills to be able to work, to do the work, the menial work that they want us to do, not going into the critical aspect of creating a situation or setting up a system which will make our people to be more critically minded and to be able to create things which can rival the colonial masters. That's how I look at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Othello. Thank you, Othello. You're inviting us to begin answering the initial question that I asked at the start of the class onto why do we see the gaps today in the transformation of the nation, yet we are getting more and more people educated or more and more people going through school. Why is it that we have such an anomaly about our thinking around leadership? Could this have been the ripple effect of what Prof. Wandia is talking about? But let's listen. Thank you, Othello. Let's listen to Paul and then Zipporah.
Good evening, Harry, and a lot of my colleagues.
Good evening.
I think I've known Dr. Wandia for some time, and he's a good critic. Now, what I got from introduction was that the missionaries introduced everything new to us Africans in terms of education, and I feel that she's saying the truth from my perspective, and that the missionaries sort of colonized our mind, and by introducing everything new and doing away with our traditional forms of learning, education, skills, and everything, I think that's where the problem began. And we as Africans, up to now, the common, I can say the common financial, the common consumers of education have no chance to critique or even ask or even question any form of education or knowledge being imparted to them, either through the government. We don't have that chance to question. And that's what actually happened during that time when missionaries came in. The Africans or Kenyans were not able or given a chance to even question what they're learning. They just consumed what they were given. And that's how everything that was every skill or knowledge or traditional forms of education or ways of learning were cleared away by these missionaries. Thank you.
Thank you. And I hear you, Paul, and I share in your thoughts here because you would think that education, being driven by the missionary enterprise, would have had more to do with morals, instilling morals, shaping the DNA of a people. But what we are hearing, and you agree to that, Paul, and also Othello mentioned that, is that education was to make people subservient. I mean, people went to school for a trade to work. And that detachment has never taken place ever since, whereby we never stop seeing education as a step to work or as a way of accessing work. Because as we heard from Wandia, missionaries trained people to become clerks and accountants to work and manage the farms. All right, while menial laborers never even needed to be in school to pick up cotton and all that. So and that's the entry point, plus that is the entry point of education, as it were, to a continent like ours. All right, I see more hands are up. Thank you, Paul. Zipporah, and then we'll have Cindy, then Josephine, then Oluoch, and then Chris, in that order. And then we'll move to the second.
Dr. Allow me to interject before my colleague comes in.
Yes,
I'm sorry,
yes, Chris.
I've been late. Kindly bring me to the page. What are we talking about? I've just logged in a few minutes ago, and I can only hear people answering. I don't know what was the question, so that you help me.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Chris. Welcome. We just watched a video. It's quite lengthy. I'm not sure that we'll be able to watch it again. But in a nutshell, it's a video that I'm going to share with all of us. An interview done to Professor Wandi Njoya, a professor of communication and arts at Daystar University, but also an educationist. And so she's responding to an interview question on where the education system, or the education as it were, started from, the problems that we're encountering today, where they started from. And she digs back into the colonial era, where the missionary education, as per her argument, was to make people subservient to the colonial government, was to prepare workers for the colonial government, not so much to shape morals and values to a people. So you would expect an education coming from missionaries would be to instill values and more, good morals, but that was not the case. And so my question was, do you think the colonial education the missionary education or the missionary enterprise played into the hands of the colonial agenda? Or were they part and parcel of the same thing? So just in a nutshell, because we are trying to read what's going on today. Why don't we see an impact of education on the masses, yet we are having education or literacy levels being the highest in the moment than ever, as recorded? But anyway, yeah, so Zipporah, and then Cindy, then Josephine, then Oluoch, and then Boaz. Zipporah.
Thank you so much, Doc. To me, my understanding about missionary education, first, it was discriminative in nature, because you'll realize that there were schools for the Africans, and the type of the education which the Africans were given, it was elementary in nature. And then apart from that, you also realize that it was the education was there to fulfill the colonial, it was a way of colonialism, in that there was that idea that the education was there to civilize the Africans. In the real sense, you will realize that that type of education, it was not all to do with intellectual development of an individual, but it was just there to brainwash the Africans and make them give in to the colonial masters. Thank you.
Thank you, Zipporah. I think you're basically agreeing to that, to the initial claim. Thank you very much. Cindy?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. First, I would like to say that as much as the primary intention of missionaries was not to pave a way for colonization, but in the process of spreading the gospel, it happened that it acted as a way of paving a way for colonization of the African continent. And then, so responding to Wandia's view, I would support her argument. Why? Because the desire of the missionaries was that the Africans abandon their religion. Remember, when they came, they established many churches in Africa, where the mode of even teaching and the spreading gospel was in English. So they were forced to adopt the Western religion and culture and abandon their own African values. And through this, they also established schools where Africans got formal education. And once one acquired education, remember, the main agenda was not to enrich the African continent. They wanted to get maybe cheap labor. That is what I was taught in high school. I don't know whether it's true, to cheap labor from Africans. And so after that, now they use that as a tool to colonize Africans, using their fellow Africans to make them view their values as a continent, as in the society, their values, their principles as evil. So through that, the colonization came in, where even the Africans themselves were used as a tool to colonize their fellow Africans. So that's my contribution on the same.
Thank you. So you emphasize on the word tool. So that was not the original intention, but eventually became a tool for enhancing or allowing or enabling colonization. Thank you, Cindy, for that. Josephine, then Oluoch, and then lastly Boaz. We'll listen to the next video.
Okay, for me, I took in
Yes, Josephine.
the guys.
Are you talking?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Well, from afar, really from afar.
No.
Can you come
And
closer to the microphone?
Okay, and now?
Okay. I don't know about the others. Maybe it's me who's losing my hearing. That's one of the things that go when one is aging. But
It
can
could
you
be
get
my
closer?
device. It could be my device has a fault. I don't know.
Okay,
Maybe
we can. I
someone
think
can.
I think we can hear you now. You can proceed, but just be as close as possible to the mic.
Okay. So according to me, the gaps from Dr. Wandia is that the education system created, it did not give an opportunity to create self-esteem. So she talks about people not being given an opportunity to get a build up as a person, as a whole. So they were just giving the education that was given was at a lower level, and it was limited. She also talks about violence, that the education system was a bit violent. Its aim was to put people down. That is why they were not given higher education level. Then what went wrong, according to what I got, is that the whole aim of education by that time. So they wanted to give Africans the lowest level of education for them to be able to be civil to work for them. Then how can we fix it? We get a curriculum that builds a person as a whole, not just examinable education system, but to create somebody who can have the guts to question. She talks about questioning the government, that we are having a government, but we cannot even question the wrongdoings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josephine. At least you answered the three questions: the gaps, what went wrong, how can we fix it, and that aspect of questioning the government is critical. It's critical. The question is, who will do it? Who will do it and how? What are the modalities? And so while we're wrestling with that, let's listen to Oluoch and then Boaz.
Thank you very kindly, Dr. Munyao. I hope I am audible.
Yes, you
are. Thank you very much. I will answer by first making the following statement, that our belief should be that education, the purpose of getting education, should be to give us or equip us with the ability to create solutions to the localized problems that we face from the individual level, the family level, to the societal level, creating workable solutions to our local problems. Secondly, I agree with Dr. Wandia with regards to missionary education making folks subservient. And I wanted to back that up by sharing with you two examples. If you read the book, Catholic History in Kenya, a Centenary Celebration, the book that was written to celebrate the 100 years of Catholic Church in Kenya, it details at some point how education was essentially propagated amongst the communities. And in a very overt example, they say that the missionaries would go to a community and would request the community to identify one boy amongst the community members who would then have the privilege to be taken in to be educated. As part of the gift for that, the boy would be provided after some of the education with a pair of trousers. And so the effect of this, if you look at it, is that the missionary education created prestige so that folks wanted to have the prestige of having learned through the missionaries, not to solve their problems anyway. And that boy who was educated was one amongst the many, with the intention that he would become the kind of administrator or the conduit through which the missionaries and the colonialists would pass, their colonial intent to the people. So they made the education, one, privileged by making it scarce, and number two, prestigious, so that people are seeking prestige rather than seeking solutions. My second and final example to show you that education really, from the missionary point of view, was more of subservience than on empowering, is the case of the denial of Okot Pabitek to achieve or to get his PhD at the University of Oxford. I think it was University of Oxford, I can confirm on that. But the basis of this was that Okot Pabitek had written and researched to show that the African had a religion similar to the context of the European, and therefore insinuating that the African was at par in terms of intelligence, in terms of worldview with the white person. So education that was provided, as long as it made the African subservient, that was encouraged. As long as it made the African begin to question, then it was suppressed. So with those few points, I agree with Dr. Wandia's positing that education for the Africans by the missionaries initially was more on the subservience thing. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Watch, for that thorough and incisive take and assessment of Professor Wandia's sentiments. I cannot agree I know more, because you've really nailed it on the head. Just a quick one. What is the title of this book again? The 100-year celebration of the Catholic Church?
It's the history of the Catholic Church in Kenya, a centenary. I can get the actual words once I get to a place where I can in my library. And I'll share that. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to look for it. Thank you, Lodge, for that. Yes, and so that really, this agreement with everyone points to the questions that I had before on the question of value-based, moral-centric education, and as to whether we are having. as to whether we are having it. But let's have Boaz coming, and then we shall move to the next video to make an integration with what we've just heard from Professor Andia. Boaz.
Yes, Malimu, can you hear me well?
Yes, there's a little bit of humming from your microphone, but we can hear you. You're audible.
Okay, thank you. I think my colleagues have really dealt with the issue, and the only thing I would have wished them to belabor, because I totally agree with them. And I think the interesting thing is that I've had one-on-one also discussion with Wandia on the subject. And I know that the discussion where it is at right now is about what philosophy drives our education system in Kenya. And I know that's an ongoing conversation. But when we look at the education as was introduced, I think it is the Western education, and I think Wandi has dealt with the issues of how the missionaries came and what it actually was meant to achieve. I would also attempt to explain a few parameters which probably were not really gotten right. Because when you discuss education, there must be the educators. Then there must also be the curriculum. And the curriculum can only be designed to deliver the purpose of that education. And so also I think there one feature which I'll throw in there, which I think nobody is writing about, is that there must be the principle of utmost good faith when delivering education, because education has got that potential to transform a society, starting with the individual. And imagine if you are attempting to deliver something good, but then you use wrong methods, or you deliberately give the wrong curriculum. And then finally, the products of that education system think that they are educated. So I would really take issue with the manner in which education was introduced in Africa. Because it appears that they were not very clear on what was the purpose of that education. I would say that probably the missionaries, as they arrived, they wanted people to understand them in their language instead of doing the other way, learning the local language and integrating and actually being part and parcel of the community, so that you get to understand that there are certain things which they do, their cultural practices have got meaning, so that you build the faith-based issues around that. Because indeed, I've not come across any literature which portrays that the African communities did not have a religion, that they did not have God in their lives, that they did not know God as the creator of themselves and all that. So I would say that then the educators themselves probably did not have the right preparation. And indeed, as we say, educators, those are teachers, they actually require to be prepared or prepped in a particular manner to be able to deliver the curriculum, and which curriculum I'm also saying should also be respectful and understanding of the society where it is being developed, because the curriculum needs also capture that aspect. So when you say where the gaps are, I think I look at the gaps in the educators, I look at the gaps in the curriculum, and I look at the gaps in the attitude and the approach that was used by the missionaries, because they informed a lot of how the education began. And you'd realize that I think what my colleagues have mentioned, that they wanted those who can read and write, so that you can help in the work that they were doing. I would have wished to think that then they should have looked more deeply, because at that time, the Western education had advanced in as much as when historically we also look at it, the origin of education in a very clear manner also happened to have been here in Africa. So essentially, those who were designing how this education, the Western education, was to be introduced to the African, I think missed the opportunity to harmonize issues and get to the depth of some of the facts which are ordinarily now coming up, like the origin of the form of life that we constantly keep referring to. I also wanted to add I think where we need to go and how can that be done. Every country, every nation, because now we have evolved into nations or states, each requires to have deeper reflections on why education, for who that education is, to achieve what purpose, and how it is to be delivered, and how it leverages on the current context. The current context includes technology. I think when we look at that, then we'll be able to direct our education in the right way. And what we must avoid, I wanted to add that, is politicization of education. We must avoid that because, one, I think some of us came of age at a time when education was being made as an instrument by state leadership to be compliant and to be passive and just to obey. And in that respect, I think we had even we had the loyalty pledges, which were very crazy forms of delivering education. So we should avoid that. Two, education, particularly when we take the aspects of the history, it should actually give us the true account of our history and literature, because a lot of things which happened in our own lives were not considered to be worthy of being recorded and being taught. For example, some of us did not get to learn more about the liberation struggle because the people who participated in the liberation struggle were considered not to be worthy of being mentioned in such a process. And as such, very rich and true history really is hidden. And I think those of us who may be having access to what Professor Maina Wakinyati has been researching can really get just tips on what some of that literature or that history could look like. So I'm saying that education in itself should be made open in a freer and open manner so that the documentation of our history and what is being taught is one that can help us, because from the past we are able to learn on the mistakes, real mistakes, not mistakes created by others. But we are also able to learn on the good things, the progress, the indigenous knowledge, for example, on how food security, for example, was being made and things like that. So I thought I needed to add that. Thank you.
Wow, wow. Thank you. Thank you, Boaz. You share this with a lot of authority from a point of information, but also practice and knowledge base. And, highly respect that. Thank you so much. You mentioned, you started off by asking whether we have a philosophy that drives our education in Kenya. And I think that's a question that we might need to interrogate further. I have only had a few people getting into that question of philosophy. What philosophy? And I think I have another video. If I get time, I'll share later on. You can remind me where Wandia interviews a young man, another young man on philosophy, but it has its bearing on religious philosophy. So it might miss the point for this, the purpose for this lesson, but all the same, it queries the issue of philosophy, whether Africans have a philosophy. upon which we can peg our learning. So, so I think that is really interesting that you raise it at this point. But you've mentioned curriculum, yes. So curriculum. And I like what you're raising, that history is missed. That the true account of our history and literature, as you put it, was missed, totally missed in the missionary education. And maybe this answers what Wandia had raised earlier, that maybe they wanted to redefine our history so that we may not know our roots properly, but also to quench any ideas about raising a revolution and seeking to go back to who we are or who we were. Maybe that was part of it. Maybe this was just an evil genius to do so, playing into the hands of the colonialists, because should we have gotten our history right, then perhaps the revolution that was led by Mau Mau and others would have been intense, would have been widespread, would have been really bigger than what it was, as good as it helped us. But thank you, Boaz, for that. Interestingly, you talk about you're warning us not to politicize education, but that's our next topic for next week. So let's see how that goes. Sam, I was hoping to move to the next video in the interest of time, but let me get let me pick your brain in a minute or so, very briefly.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. I thought let me admit first of all that I actually joined the class late. And what I'm going to say or ask is based on what I have heard colleagues say and what I have heard you say as well. I want to begin by thinking I could easily be the devil's advocate here. And I'm wondering, I work in a country that chose to go back to themselves after independence in 1991. And what I mean here is that they chose be traditional, educate their children and everybody else in their own language, do everything in their specific language. And they were very cultural in doing this. But today, they have hired us from Kenya to come and teach their children. And this is because they have realized that the limits that come with their qualifications and especially language are so insurmountable. Here we have people who know nothing else about the world because all they know is what is written in their mother tongue, is what they have heard in their mother tongue. And you can be sure that that comes with a lot of limitations. So today in the 21st century, they are opening their eyes and wondering where the world has gone and left them behind. And it's now that they are embracing internationalism. It's now that they are opening themselves up to the world so that they can be part of this world. So as much as we want to condemn, the colonialists and the missionaries for whatever they did, I feel that we should also give them credit that they opened our country to the world. Today, Kenyans can work anywhere in the world, especially where there is English spoken and even other foreign languages. The education system that we adopted, even with all the changes that have happened, has been borrowed from abroad, which means that Kenyans have knowledge about the world. They can fit in the different systems in the world. And for that reason, we are growing. So I believe we would not have been better off if we remained on our own without the coming of colonialists and the missionaries. And I know that obviously this is a controversial topic, and I may want to let you, Daktari, to continue the next area, but I think it's a point to ponder. I mean, I wanted to add something. What happened to the communist ideologies that were being propagated by Tanzania, our neighbors? and other countries of the world. What happened to them? Where have those ideologies left the propagandists of those ideologies? And I think sometimes let's be fair to the devil. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, for raising that. And we are totally on the same page in that actually none of us has questioned as to whether we were advantaged to have missionary education or not. The question that we are probing from the video that we just watched, an interview done to Professor Wandia Njoya, is to the substance of the education, the content of the question of the education. What was contained in it and what was the intention of it? And borrowing from her research, she concludes that it was meant to make the receiver, the beneficiary of the education, subservient to the colonial government. And that's why there was the evil genius of, just training skilled people to manipulate and control the others. So they would run, like my father was a court clerk, among the very first people who were educated in the colonial system. But immediately after graduation, after finishing high school, went to be a clerk in the court. And I guess some of you of my age here, your parents, played similar roles in the colonial system. And so it was never meant to instill any values, as Christian as it was. It was never meant to instill any morals as Christian as it was, but it actually was designed to create workers. And that narrative comes along. I don't know whether some of you can remember this song. Those of you who are in Kenya can remember the song So Many Vijana. Anyone here who is of my era, remember that song So Many Vijana? Muongeze pia bidii. Baada ya kusoma usiku sijui ya nini, mtapata kazi nzuri sana. So education was never detached from work. You and I know that that is not the intention of a good education. Yes, it prepares one for work, but is not the only reason that people are developed to be, that people go to school. So that's what we are responding to. But we are also grateful, Sam, that we have skilled Kenyans across the globe taking advantage of the exposure we got earlier to be who we are, in serving the labor force globally. So allow me to move to the second video, Education for Social Change. And again, let me play it with another browser because this is going to bring a lot of ads.
If you're a business owner, then animated explainer videos are the best way to capture it.
Let me skip this.
Get more fun.
Okay. 1 second.
What is in your hand?
All right. Let me play it here.
What is in your hands?
Can you hear that?
To make a difference in the world.
Let me make sure that everybody can hear that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's cutting anyway.
Okay, I just paused it.
What is in your hands to make a difference in the world? This is a question I not only ask of myself, but I also ask of my students. However, educational institutions fail to raise this important question. This is a missed opportunity to connect students' personal skills and development with their moral responsibility to leave the world a better place than how they found it. So for me, when I think about reimagining education, I envision education for social change, placing an explicit focus on leadership development and social justice advocacy. And in fact, for me, it's a dream come true. I always wanted to become Miss Freedom Fighter Esquire. Basically, Wonder Woman with a law degree and an afro. Can you see me now? I was determined to use my education in the struggle for justice. And history has shown us that students have been at the forefront of social change movements, whether it be the freedom riders of our past who fought against racial segregation, or the dream defenders of our present who fought against stand your ground laws. As parents, as educators, as community members, we must stand ready to equip the next generation for this important leadership role. So you may be wondering, why? Why is this important? My answer is simple. Young people are the future. They will shape and define the moral conscience of this nation. They will move us closer to the essence of unity, beyond the restraints of Black or white, or rich or poor, to the higher moral ground of liberty and justice for all. So for me, I had no choice but to join in the struggle. For far too long, injustice was my reality. I watched as a tangled web of mass incarceration emerged, and I call it a tangled web because there's far too many entry points and far fewer exit points. America, as an industrialized nation, has the highest incarceration rate in the world, with over 2 million people incarcerated, and the vast majority of them being people of color. So I watched as a child witness to the war on drugs, as our moms and our dads, our aunts and our uncles, and our brothers and sisters entered into the prison gates. And they were locked up and locked out. And I say locked out because they returned back home with a permanent scarlet letter that read F for felon. They were restricted from access to jobs, housing, and even voting. Our communities are broken. And as a student teacher, I thought I could make a difference, that I could live out the words of Malcolm X, that education is the passport to the future. But for far too many students, that passport is permanently revoked. I watched and saw the frustration in the eyes of a young Black boy in my kindergarten classroom as he struggled to read. It was through no fault of his own. He never had access to early childhood education. But guess what? He's not alone. 96% of eligible children never have access to programs like Head Start because of lack of funding. So when that young man struggled, we all struggled because our futures are interconnected. So our children are broken. So all of a sudden, I came to realize at the intersections of race and poverty that our policies were broken and that something had to be done. So I could stand on the sidelines or even remain broken myself. But instead, I made a decision. I said, I'll be that change. I decided to go to law school. And I decided that I would use my legal training to make a difference in the world. So all of a sudden, Miss Freedom Fighter Esquire, she stepped on the scene. But as you know, no good superhero can work alone. So I had a team of law students who were committed to make a difference in the world. They wanted to become social engineers who would use their legal training to create new inroads to freedom and justice for all. So all of a sudden they believed in the words of Charles Hamilton Houston, that a lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society. So they said they would never fit in the latter categories by using their legal training to advance the cause of justice. So my team and I, together, we reimagined education. We went beyond serving just a handful of clients in a legal clinic to changing the underlying policies that were creating inequities, those hidden barriers. So we fought against the high cost of prison phone calls, which at $1 per minute prevented nearly 3 million children from remaining in contact with their incarcerated parents. So we had a victory at the federal level to help cap the costs, but there is still work to do in states like Minnesota to make sure prison phone calls are fair, just, and reasonable. So when I think about the work of my students, they taught me an important lesson, that there's hope when you're willing to roll up your sleeves to make a difference in the world. So when leaving us with that question of what is in your hands to make a difference in the world, my students taught me a simple lesson, that there is power, the type of transformative power in our hands to move beyond race, tribe, or creed to our shared humanity and our shared destiny. Will you too join me in unleashing the transformative power in your hands? Thank you.
All right. So back to our questions. What were the gaps? Now, this is a different case. The first one was education in Kenya. This one was the education system in the United States of America. What were the gaps? What went wrong? How can we fix it? Or rather, how did she fix it? Right? Any comments, any contributions? Just based on that video alone. Yes, Othello. You are muted if you're talking, Othello.
Yes, Dr. I want to just get the ball rolling. Maybe when I talk, then people will get they will get into it. I want to dare to say that this woman, she has started with the question, what is that in your hand? And she closed with that same question, what is that in your hand? And what I'm getting from her, she has told us about the system that is in the USA, which I see very clearly from what we have been witnessing for many years now in the USA. I think the system there is that much as we admire their system and also the way they apply their law, but when you look at it, you see that their law is applied even selectively. While we may have even worse situation, their law is also applied selectively. And the Black community, the African Americans, and the Black community as a whole has been made to be stereotyped and stigmatized that these people, they are going to be put in a class where, in a community where they stay, they are violent people. They have been categorized like that. And so the police must, she said that the majority of people, America has the highest number of prisoners. And those prisoners, the majority of them are Black. I think it's because of the way they have been brought. The system has made them to be that you are this way, you cannot be that way. You are this way, you cannot be that way. You cannot go farther. So you have to be categorized like that. And the young people grow up knowing that they have been stigmatized. So there is nothing good. They grow up in a hopeless situation, majority of the young people in the USA. So the woman is saying that you people, you are capable of being transformed and transforming other people in your society. This is the same thing that Martin Luther King was fighting for equality. And this education, it can be transformed. People should not be living in a hopeless situation, as many Blacks in the USA live in, and they get involved in drug addiction because of what they have been taught and what they have been told. You are told that you cannot do this, but you cannot do this. You can only be this way. So this is the problem we are seeing there in America, and this problem trickled down to even our situation. Thank you.
Thank you. And, you know, I hear you. And Othello at the center in her agonizing of the fact that the United States of America today has over 2 million people incarcerated, and majority of them are Black. And then she links that back to the social inequalities that land the Black people in jails in the first place. And one of those is lack of access to early childhood education. That for me was like a surprise. I don't know where she pulled that from, but it just came out at me the first time I listened to this video. It just came flying at me as a surprise that I would have never made that connection. But then she does it so well, and she gets into the depths of it and gives even living examples and illustrations. Thank God she suggests ways of how to fix it. Thank you, Atana, for that. Yes, Oloch.
Thank you very much, Dr. Munyan. Thank you, Taylor, for that. The first joke I have is, unless we know your age, we don't know which cohort you fall under, Dr. Munyan. But most likely, some of the experiences you had, we also had them. Yeah, I hope I'm audible, yeah?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, very good. So to answer about this lady, Dr. Munyan, I think it puts us in a near dilemma. Number one, to agree with her from the point of view of, look, the purpose of education is to make our lives better, appreciate the world more, and for us to be active participants in essentially running the affairs of the world. And for that, she made a personal choice to pursue some form of education that would make her actually be equipped to be able to do that. And I think that is the essence of what should happen. And she says this because she is a part of a minority who traditionally, which term I also use advisedly here, because it's based on policy, minority who by policy are denied access to such kind of education. So she is an example that it is possible. We can also be what we want, or we can also challenge in the other fields that maybe the other races are in, and do it much better. But here is then the dilemma that I get. Her call that, look, go out there and do it. And my dilemma comes from, I think, what Nyabere was struggling with. That even though she says, go out there, all of you minority people, and grab this, she ignores for a moment the context that has been created by the policies in place. The policies in place are such that the minorities will find themselves, for flimsy reasons, not being able to access it. So they fight about being jailed. They fight about being dragged. They fight about even earning a simple living. To use, for those of you who watch comedy, Chris Rock, one of the biggest comedians in America, says that where he lives, he's a Black person, where he lives in California, he had to move mountains, big trenches. But for a white person, he just had to hop and skip and find himself or herself in that level. So it is overall in the change of policies. And let me finish it this way. Whereas she's talking about the context of America, I want to put out a question out there. How come that in Kenya, we have people with the same degree that she got in law or have pursued other courses that are privileged in America, for example, to other classes. And yet those Kenyans who have assumed that degree have not been successful as the white people. How come we have Bill Gates, a person who didn't finish college, but is white, becomes a billionaire with so much money beyond even the money that one African country can have? So I applaud her, and she gives the example. If we use the theory of diffusion of innovations, she gives the example that it is possible. But I think she has watered down the effort that, not the effort, the task that is ahead of us. We need to have more of her. And then this more of her fight the policies that create those particular contexts. That's my submission. I may be wrong. And over to you, Dr. Munyao.
Absolutely, absolutely. You're not wrong. Thank you, Oluoch. I like the emphasis.
Allow me
Yes,
to
sir.
ask Oluoch to finish. He has not finished.
Yeah,
Because
okay.
before you come in, because you see, I want to ask him a question. Ndugu Madiang, you find a man who is starving today, you must give him food, even as you teach him how to farm and fish and get food. Please continue. You did not conclude. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Madiang, would you like to respond to that?
Thank you very much, Dr. Munyao, and thank you very much, Boaz Waruku. Conflict of interest. Boaz Waruku and I have been in the trenches. He went deeper than I did. But let me answer it this way, if I will really get what Boaz is asking, and for which I have made the joke that even if you take the example of Boaz and myself, Boaz went deeper, but Madiang only scratched the top. For those of you who do not know, FM in Boaz Waruku is Field Marshal. But Boaz, think about it this way. Even in the struggle, in facing the oppression of these policies, how come that we only have a few of us, only a few, who essentially go the whole hog? And the reason I think is that the forces stacked against us, and the context that people are in, we want to make a living, sometimes make people not go beyond. So we find a starving man, we give them food. But then we start teaching the starving man how to make food, only for the starving man to realize, I have my mother, my son, my daughter, whom I need to feed right now, rather than learn the long process of getting food. That process of getting food, Boaz, to me is the interpretation I'm saying the policy context limits the abilities. It creates a barrier for the folks to actually learn how to make food and essentially become independent. I hope I've been able to attempt your question well. Over to you, Dr. Munyao.
Thank you. You've done it so well, Oluoch, and I was, before Boaz came in, I was going to point out and highlight how your observation is so succinct, very, very crisp, that even though she, the lady in the video raises very good ideas and questions. She even calls us to reimagine education, calling it power in our hands. You say that she has watered down the efforts that deserves this nature of a call. I agree with you, because actually even when applied to us, maybe it could be easier for her because of the already laid down infrastructure in education in developed countries. But I think it's more of a burden to us developing countries, as that is not as easy as she might want to put it now contextually to other countries. But she also mentioned that she talks about broken policies, that policies are broken. I don't want to get into the discussion about policies. I know you have an entire course that deals with policy framework in education, and that's not where this lesson is heading to. But you know, she does call us to shape the moral conscience of any country by education. By education, an education that shapes the moral conscience of a country. For her, it's with reference to America, but I guess the same is true for us. But let's hear Obadiah, and then we'll move on to the next few slides before we close.
Yeah, good evening, Prof.
Good evening.
Sometimes it's a bit tricky when you have a suggestion to make after Madiang and Boaz have had a conversation. Sometimes you wonder what will you say thereafter. But I was looking at this as my colleagues were airing their opinions. I thought that the transformativeness of education towards the society is a two-sided coin. And I looked at it, I took it from the American context. Now I was trying to imagine education, the transformativeness of education in an African context, especially in the leadership position. Some of our leaders are well educated. They earned their PhDs. Some of them have master's degrees. But now looking at how far or how much the education that they earned, some of them earned the education that they have under very terrible circumstances because of the background that they came from. And maybe when we saw them on the ballot, we had hoped that maybe because they know the background and they understand some constraints that they went through, they could make a drastic change. But now I'm wondering, and my question is this: what drives the flipping of this coin? What, as we look forward for a transformative education, or to have transformative leaders, to have a transformative generation through education in a positive way, what do you think is the drive that leads a person to flip this coin to the positive side? Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that take, Obadiah. And to your question, what drives the flipping of this coin? I wonder whether we have anyone who can respond to that in a minute before we listen to Cindy, or rather, is Cindy going to answer that question in your comments? But as someone thinks about that question, let's hear Cindy. So what drives the flipping of this coin as Obadiah has raised it? Cindy, if you're talking, you're muted, eh? Okay. Yeah, we can't hear you, Cindy. And I think as others are thinking about Obadiah's question, this has everything to do with the origins of education, but also it's calling us to go back. Actually, I'm hearing a revolutionary voice calling out scholars, thinkers, educationists, thought leaders in this unenviable task of reimagining the education system on the continent in general, so that we can bridge this gap between education and values. Because I think that's the elephant in the room here. If we are listening out to each other, is the bridge, is the gap between education and a value-based education and society. Can society be shaped by a good education? And what does it take? Now, what does it take is not going to be an easy question to answer. That's why we are here. And I want to draw our attention towards the close of our discussion today to some scriptures that might shed some light. But before that, let's hear out Cindy.
Sorry, I was kicked out. My network is not stable. Yeah, so I was saying, according to Dr. Wandia, she said that the government wants to tell lecturers what to teach. And she likened this to colonial system in operation. So my question is, and then she, at some point, she said that what the government should do is just let the educators know the kind of skills that they want, the kind of a person that that they want. But now the question is, what do you think would happen if the schools, if the universities are left to decide what to teach? Because she's like she's trying to critique the effort of the government in controlling the education system in Kenya, in schools. So what do you think would happen if the schools were left to decide what to teach?
Thank you, Cindy. And I think going back to Professor Wandia's comments, she's actually critiquing the government for telling the universities or the schools altogether not what to teach, but what to do. What to do. And I think in her comparison is instead of listening, she actually critiques the government and asks the government or calls upon the government to listen to the educationists, to listen to the academics, to listen to the education stakeholders, and not vice versa, not telling the stakeholders what to do. I think that's her concern. And I totally agree with her because that's where we miss it. Remember, at one point, she critiques the regulators, our education regulators, for coming out at the academics, and all they are doing is, we are here to smoke you out. We are here to catch you. And once we catch you and having known what you have done, we are going to embarrass you. All right? That's not the point. The point is, why can't the same regulators come out to the educationists and ask them, what are you doing? And how can we be of value, all right, to your endeavors as you try to educate the nation? All right? And say, hey, here are the policies. We need to implement them, but then you are the stakeholders. Okay? Boaz, just quickly.
Thank you. Maybe I just wanted to help a number of us get a brief of really what has been happening in a number of our countries, including Kenya, in the past just a few years before the opening up of the space happened. Mwalimu, you talked about, you were mentioning things which we should be knowing. But it appears many of us may not know that we went to school at a time when we had classmates who were not there to study, but just to monitor what the teacher was teaching. I start from there. In Kenya, that happened. And the part of the work I used to do in Africa, I happened to have been in Malawi. There's a lecturer who was actually arrested as he was delivering his lectures, simply because he was getting to the bottom of the problems that Malawians were having. If you can remember, I think it is about, that was during Mbingu or Mudharika's reign. The lecturer happened to have taken that as a case study to look at how transitions happened. He was dealing with the students of political science. And when he used the example, he found himself being bundled out of that lecture hall and locked up. And so I understand where Professor Njoya is coming from. And I think I just want to bring it close and tell you that many of the countries which have developed so well with education have opened up this space in education. Recently, I had a chance to interact with the delegation from Finland. If you know, I think you can Google and even check, you'll realize that Finland is considered among the top in terms of education. Performance in the STEM and all disciplines. They actually do not discriminate. And yet the workload, even in class or in schools, is not that heavy. It's because they have taken time to study what exactly should be delivered. They know that the world continues to advance. They know that there are certain skills that will be required right now, which cannot wait. And they actually go and develop that skill. If they don't have it in Finland, they identify institutions that have it elsewhere and indeed give scholarships to their students who do not go and disappear, but come back and enable the others to learn from them. And indeed, the teachers in Finland are the ones who look at the quality and standards. And every 5 years, they review the curriculum with the parents, with the learners, and with the industry in mind, so as to look at what is not being delivered. And so when Dr. Njoya, Professor Njoya, she was recently elevated to associate professor. When Professor Njoya talks about the government should not be telling the educators, teachers, lecturers, and all that, it's because it's been proven that where the government comes in, the government is in the business of looking at how certain materials which may be looked at to be radical should not reach the classrooms or lecture theaters. I think those who have taken time, you'll know that Ngugi wa Thiong'o, for example, as a literature lecturer, was taken to detention based on the work he was doing there, you know. So what I think we should be knowing is that the teachers, having been trained well and knowing what to deliver, and with the parents also participating, because the parents should themselves be very conscious and knowing where Kenya needs to go, because you only educate towards a particular vision. And that is why we're saying a philosophy around that education requires to be done. And by the way, let me finish by indicating to you that the kind of problems we are having in Kenya is based on the lopsided nature of how education is delivered, because education socializes people. From that TED talk, you realize the importance of the early childhood development and the education at that level, because the child, Kiswahili, they have a saying, but the child that is developed at that level, socialized in that level, is the one that would either know that in Kenya, we as a nation have so many nationalities and people from different areas, and that these people are people like us, and that there's nothing between us and them that should make us grow in suspicion based on stereotypes. And fortunately, in Kenya now, you'll find a Kenyan who has grown in his or her own village, but really thinks of another Kenyan she or he has been told grows or grown somewhere to be a totally different person, thinking that that person is an enemy, for example. So the socialization that education does, if it is not nurtured by professionals, by the educators who are governed only by the ethics of the teaching profession, then that is where we are saying, let the government, because the government will always try to bring their own things. And of course, you know the kind of leaderships we get in government, and that is political leadership. Many of them have got no idea even about the issues that are being discussed, only that they've found themselves to be leading. So they should be giving space to the educators, because when you collapse an education system, everything else actually would crumble. And that's the position that some of us hold very, very firmly and dearly.
Thank you very much, Boaz, for that. And I think you've answered one of the questions that I was going to raise in one of the next slides, as in what you're saying. But yeah, in agreement with what Professor Njoya has shared, we are looking at a government that would do much better than playing the role of a prefect, and you give very scary examples, you know, in the manner that you shared, those examples of people in the classroom that are not supposed to be in class but are not students with you. Yeah, very true. And again, talking about the education system, that each education system has its own agenda, a political agenda, actually. And I think it was you who warned us earlier on not to politicize education, but it is political, you know, from the word go. The very first, you know, education system that was entrenched since the founding of the nation was carved into the politics of the land. And so I don't know how we're going to disentangle it from that to run towards the freedom that we are talking about, reimagining education that is going to shape values and morals of a country. True leadership, true biblical leadership that I'm going to be closing with in a few. But then there's an article that I published together with colleagues at Daystar. Actually, Professor Yuro, one of them, Professor Moreidi, and others. Dr. Adoli, if you know her. It's on ambition. The title of that article is Ambitions Racing Ahead of Capabilities, the politics of a competency-based curriculum in Kenya. You know, that article is out and I can share it with you. I think I can post a link to it as let me post a link here as Oluoch is making a comment so that you trace.
In fact, Prof was about to do that, but the better, the sooner you do that for us, the better.
Yeah. And so I think you know, that let me post as Oluoch Madiang is making his comments because I see his hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Manyao. And thank you, Boaz, for that. You touch painful memories. So as Boaz was speaking, I think the question that Cindy asks, and partly also I think what Obadia asks about where the flip happens, makes me made me raise my hand to at least react to that. From Cindy's perspective, I think the fight we have is where government is directing folks on what to learn. And that to me is which leads to education for work. We are only limited to get information, just like the colonialists limited us, for us to be competent at work. And here is the test of it. Think about how many people are so educated and have worked so diligently and so well, who after retirement, their education becomes useless. They cannot apply that education anywhere because they have retired their education, so to speak. But the quest then should be, how does that education make us question, make us create philosophies, make us create values, so that, as Boaz is saying, our education becomes a transformative thing beyond our normal work. And I think that's the dilemma from my perspective that Obadiah then asks. How come that we have so many people who are so educated and they become leaders, and yet the product of their education becomes oppression, things that you would imagine uneducated people would not get? And I think my answer, to borrow one of the activists, I forget his name, said, yes, we have many educated people who are hungry. Many educated people who are hungry. So the moment they get these opportunities, it is serving their hunger, not essentially applying their education. So my hope is that the reason for which we will get educated is that post-retirement as a test, my education will still be relevant in shaping the world. And I must also confess, of course, some of us get this master's so that we may be able to get to the next level at work, you know, and that is nearly the bad reality that has been created in our system. Thank you, Dr. Munyao, for giving me the opportunity. Over to you.
Thank you, Oloch Madianga, for that. And I think you have just addressed the crux of this matter. That this is what we are struggling with. This is what we are wrestling with here. That look at the top leadership, trace leadership all the way down, and look at how valueless it is at the core. And so you wonder, and yet, like you said, we have the most educated citizens, at least in the region. You know, I'm looking at you know, and I really have absolutely nothing against the people that are pushing, you know, against femicide and all that, with all these cases that we are seeing in the country. I am absolutely with them. I support each and every effort to stand up against femicide in any country, not just Kenya. But then, aren't we also asking ourselves questions such as, who are they copying? Who are they copying? Both the victims and the offenders. Who are they copying? They are looking at educated adults. They are realizing that you can make so much money by doing absolutely nothing. All right? So the values of work, you know, the values of work are being shredded in the bins as time goes by. And I'm afraid to get to a point where my son will look back and say, so what's the point of school? If someone can sell air and be a millionaire, all right, and go and get away with it. So these are the kind of things that we are struggling with, and Olocho just bringing that in. And when these brilliant minds retire, so to speak, then they are useless. All right, Cindy, I would like to hear you out, and then we move to the next, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. I was listening to Madiang, and I totally agree with what he has said. But then my question here is, the question that I'm still wrestling with is, so where is the problem? Because as much as we have people, like he said that, I'm just going to paraphrase what he said, is that we have people who are educated, but the moment they retire, their education becomes irrelevant in the society. So my question is, could the problem be solved from the societal level? Because it's the same society which defines what success is. And when it comes also to examination, like which is measured using grades, for example, the KCPE and the KCSE, you realize that once someone gets, let's say A in KCPE, or like the society praises them. They do not recognize any other way of success apart from measured using the grade that someone got either in the KCP or in the KCSE. So the question is, where is the problem? Because we need to fix this, yes, but what exactly is the problem? He said that most of us probably we are here maybe to get the master so that we can move to the next level in our places of work, which could be true. But what is the problem? Because I don't think that is the problem. What is the problem? What is informing that kind of a mentality where someone would basically take master's education with the purpose of just raising above the lander?
So your question, Cindy, is what's wrong with that?
No. Where is the problem? Is the problem coming like, does it have its roots in the society which has been encultured to believe that success, or for you to be successful, you must have a degree, you must have masters, you must get a constant or whichever grade in the KCSE, you must get 300 and above, like for example, in the KCP. I'm asking, is a problem rooted in the society which informs how people take success as, such that I would just spend 3 hours or in a class seated here, basically to get to finish the course so that I can get a better job. Because the problem is not getting a better job. I don't think that is the issue.
Yeah.
What
Absolutely.
informs that kind of mentality?
You are right on point. I think we raised earlier on that it's the foundations. The question of where is the problem, I think now we are all in agreement that it's the foundations. It's the foundations of education as a whole in the country. And hence the cry to fix it, to fix things, which we are all agreeing here is not going to be a walk in the park. It's quite a feat. And hence you guys being here, you're gathered here so that you can become elements, parts and parcel of this social change. If we are going to drive an education that will be geared towards that, which leads me to what I was going to share next, Cindy, and maybe perhaps in the process I'll answer this question. In seeking to mainstream values and skills in the curriculum, we've seen government making a lot of efforts here. Talking about the core values of education being, integrity, love, responsibility, respect, unity, peace, patriotism, social justice. Yeah, is somebody trying to talk? Okay, so and this is actually, yes.
I'm trying to raise up my hand and it's not, I don't know, it's not responding, but however, if you allow me to answer, I guess it was Cindy. Where's the problem? The problem is actually the foundation. Where did the education begin? Yeah, this pre-colonial period era they instilled fear into Africans, for example, particularly us, that if you're not going to school, then you cannot be successful. And that's why even currently in our villages, any person who dropped out of class 8 and is successful in business, people always say, you aliiba pesa mahali, because they don't associate success, as somebody who is not educated with anything to do with success. So basically, it is the foundation, as you said. Thank you.
Thank you. You're totally in agreement with what I had raised here. And so what I'm sharing on the screen is actually taken from, it's not my original drawing. It's taken from Grace Ngugi Maina, who has written an article on mainstreaming values and life skills education in Kenya's curriculum. Actually, I think I can share that link with you right here, so that you can read the paper at your own time. It's published by Diplomatic Courier, but she does raise this that this is what the government envisions to see in the in the Kenya's curriculum system, adding values, mainstreaming values and skills into the curriculum. But question is it working? Is it working as supposed by the government? Note here, the assessment of these values should take place throughout the learning process as learners participate in various learning experiences in and out of the classroom, But then you look at out of the classroom and you wonder, for example, where is patriotism? Okay, where is patriotism? Where does country come first? As you know, as Kenya. How about social justice? As we heard from the second speaker, from the second TEDx. How about love? Right? Integrity. We could talk about all these things. You know, and you know, again, you're all familiar. I think I'm preaching to the choir here, because all these are things that you're familiar with, and she captures them. Building life skills, you know, into the education system, to raise self-awareness, self-esteem, coping with emotions, managing stress, effective communication, assertiveness, empathy, and all that. Creative thinking being among them. But I'm thinking about this, you know, because she actually picks out this as the expected outcomes of values and life skills education, whereby you have a secure and sense of personal identity, demonstrate cultural, moral, and religious consciousness, demonstrates empathy and respect for others, demonstrate ethical behavior that fosters responsible citizenship and good governance, apply critical thinking skills towards in finding ethical solutions to challenges in society, and demonstrate stewardship of resources for sustainable development. Good ELOs, good ELOs. But then, what are they? What are they based on? All right, what are they based on? What is the overarching goal of values and life skills in education to nurture these values in the citizenry? Okay, and I think this is where we come to ask the question that Cindy has raised. So, not you've heard of the question, where did the rains start beating us? But I think I'm reimagining that question. So why do the rains beat us? Why? Not when, because now we know when. When is the foundations. But why do they continue to beat us? Okay, why do they continue to beat us? And I think this is what we are missing as a people, as educationists, as a country, is in missing the point of promoting a thinking classroom. Right from the onset, right from the class, down there, where my son is in PP2. We failed to promote a thinking classroom. To shape the climate, to support thinking, do we even do so? And is CBC a solution? To create opportunities for thinking. You've heard of you know, the statement that Wandia made, Prof. Wandia made in her sentiments, that a student told her of how she was castigated for reading novels. You would assume that would be a welcome idea, a welcome effort to teach a young person critical thinking. So basically what we are saying is we are going back to the colonial, or we are sustaining the colonial mindset where which discouraged thinking, where basically you're being taught how not to think or why you shouldn't think. And so we need to furnish this guidance to inform thinking and build capacity to think. How that will happen, I leave it to you. You are the specialists. You are the specialists, but we can draw some points and ideas from the master teacher. And I want to draw your attention to Jesus' classroom. To Jesus' classroom. And just look at those passages right there. And I would like someone to open Matthew 16, 13 to 20. Another to open Mark 6, 37 to 44. A third person to open Matthew 18, 1 to 5. And another one to open Mark 12, 13 to 17. And we'll just listen as these passages are being read without interrupting. But I want you to imagine that you're in Jesus' classroom. I want you to imagine that you're in Jesus' classroom and you're listening to these discourses where the master teacher is in charge of his classroom. Let's start. Matthew 16. Who will do that? Let's get the people first. So Chris will do Matthew 16. Chris will take 16. Who will do Mark? Mark? Did I hear Sylvanus?
Yes.
Okay, so Sylvanus Getare will do Mark 6. Faith, will you do Matthew 18, 1 to 5?
Yes.
And can I get somebody? Okay, Gaki will do Mark 12, 13 to 17. I think we are done. Those four. Let's just listen uninterrupted and imagine their task here is imagine your Jesus classroom. So Matthew 16.
Thank you. In the classroom of Jesus, Peter's confession of Christ, Matthew 16, 13 to 20. The Bible says, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philip, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you? He asked, who do you say I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And then he warned his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Christ, the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Amen. Thank you so much. Next.
Amen. I suppose that must be New King James.
Great. Mark 6.
Mark chapter 6, verse 37 to 44. The Bible says, but he answered, you give them something to eat. They said to him, that will take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? How many loaves do you have? He asked. Go and see. When they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus told them to make all the people sit down in groups on green grass. So they sat down in groups of the 150. Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. And that's the word of God.
Thanks be to
Thank
God.
you. Thanks be to God. Thank you, Sylvanus. All right. Next up, Matthew 18.
Matthew 18, verse 1 to 5. At that time, the disciples asked Jesus, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? He called a crowd over, placed it on their knees, and said,
I think Faith,
You are
not audible.
we can't hear you. Can you get
maybe
closer
it's
to
my
the
network.
microphone? Sorry?
Can I start?
Can you get closer to the mic? We can't hear you clearly.
Hey, I think I am. Can you hear
Okay.
me?
We can't hear you still.
Okay, I think it's my network. Somebody else can take over.
Can somebody else pick up that text? Sorry, Faith, about.
Can I read?
Yes, please, Regina.
At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? He called a little child to him and placed the
Think you
child
have a
among
problem?
You can't hear me?
Yeah, there's a humming noise in your background there.
He called a little child to him and placed the child among them. And he said,
Regina,
truly I tell you, yes?
I don't think we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, Frank,
Someone
can
to
you read?
Yes, I can read.
Okay, thank you.
At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? He called a little child and had him sent among them. And he said, I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me. That is the word of the Lord.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Frank. Thank you,
Okay, I
Frank.
take up. Sorry.
Lastly, Mark 12.
Mark chapter 12, verse 13 to 17, the word of the Lord says, and they sent him to some of the Pharisees and some of the Herodians to trap him in his talk. And they came and said to him, Teacher, we know that you are true and do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances, but truly teach the way of God. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or should we not? But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, why put me to the test? Bring me a denarius. And they let me look at it. And they brought one, and he said to them, whose likeness and inscription is this? They said to him, Caesar's. Jesus said to them, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And they marveled at him. That is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God. Thank you so much, Gaki, for that.
Amen.
Yeah. So, you've got a chance to put yourself in the midst of Jesus' classroom. And just suppose that you are there. Do you think Jesus nurtured an environment that allowed for thinking to take place freely? Did Jesus create that environment conducive for thinking? Yes, Othello.
As in the first place, he asked, who do the thing, that scripture in Matthew 16, it says, he asked his disciples, he allowed them to think. Because he asked, but who do people say I am? You have been with me, and maybe you've been hearing people talk about me because of what I'm doing. So who do they think I am? Who do they say I am? So those guys were giving different answers. Some people say you are Elijah, some people say you are one of the prophets. But then Jesus turned to them. But who do you say I am? Now these are opinions from other people. What about you? So Jesus now created that thinking process in his disciples. What do you think I am? Who do you think I am? Now you have given me views of other people. What about yourself? So that is the process now. He allows them to think and give their own answers. Thank you.
Thanks. He allows them to first of all report or give an assessment, to do their own homework. Because them saying that, some are saying that you're John the Baptist, others say you're Elijah, others say Jeremiah, others one of the prophets. He's giving them an opportunity to tell what they already know before he can bring in the answer. Right? Allows thinking to happen. By the way, remember that at the time, there were a host of other teachers, and all teachers walked around with their disciples. That's how the Jewish learning system was set up. The Jewish education system was based on discipleship making. It was apprentice. You walked around with students. It was life on life. All right? Whereby you walk around with your disciples, you encounter challenges with your disciples, they learn from how you respond to those challenges, life on life, and challenging them to do the same. So when Jesus says, do likewise, he's really saying this in the presence of his disciples who knew that he walked the talk as an educationist. So I want to submit to you, Jesus was just one of the many teachers of his time who had disciples or walked around with the disciples. For him, it was just 12. Others had 8, others had 10, others had 15, others had even 2 or 3. Even John the Baptist had his own disciples. You know that? Yeah, so everybody walked around with disciples. But there was no other teacher in his time. There was no other contemporary of Jesus that people said, people marveled, or people wondered at what was said, or people feared. People even asked, who is this who even teaches with so much authority? Okay. So thank you. Thank you for that, Othello. And Zipporah?
Yeah, thank you so much, Doc. I just want to give an addition. To me, Jesus, if you look at the method of his teaching, he just asked questions so that he could challenge those who are so that he could challenge his students. Then apart from that, Jesus had already identified the problem with the people because there was a lot of confusion from the people. So he used that idea, or he used that confusion from the people so that it could make the disciples or the listeners to think critically and come out with the solution of the problem. Thank you.
Right, so wanting the students to critically listen and also come up with answers, with solutions to the problem. Very good, thank you. Gaki?
Thank you, Doc. One thing I really admire about his teaching is the simplicity in how he brought out the issue. And then mainly you would tend to use analogies so that it's not, for example, the part I read in Mark chapter 12, 13 to 17. It could just have been easy to tell them, yes, just go and pay, and that is it. But it just takes time and shows them, why am I actually telling you to do this? So that it's not just, okay, fine, he said no, or he said yes. So he was very keen and particular, such that whatever analogy he gave to his students or the disciples at this, is that it was something that stuck with them and never left gaps or questions as to why he did that. Thank you.
Yeah, so answering the question of why. Why? I think that's very important. And thank you for highlighting that. I think it's always important to nurture that environment again, to allow for critical thinking to take place. Chris?
Dr. I just wanted to weigh in and say the teaching by Jesus Christ in Matthew 10 is a complete replica of today's CBC, where you ask students and then you give them time to think so that then you can give them the answer later. So Jesus Christ expresses questions that wants to probe the disciples so that they can be able to look for answers, but again, at the same time, testing their faith. He just wants to know if really the disciples, the people that he's staying with, really understand him or not, because he has been walking around with him, performing miracles with him, only to realize that some of them don't actually understand who he is. And so that is what I was thinking. And it is a call up to all of us that in our life situations, sometimes you may be staying with somebody who you don't know when actually you think you know him. So it is upon us to ask God that he gives us the spirit to discern, so that then we are able to know people well. Yeah. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday when I was saying that you should not be able to have a lot of chairs on your table, because then you could be having chairs for people who are not with you in the spirit, not just in the spirit, but actually even in thinking. So those who you think are actually are not. That is what I'm borrowing from this reading. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you very much, Chris. I think you're totally nailing it on the head, and just like others in agreement that Jesus is provocative. Jesus is very provocative. I'm not sure whether even the CBC can get anywhere close to Jesus' style of framing a question. Because look at how he takes the question and flips it back to the students, but having interrogated what's the reality on the ground, what's going on. All right, like a question of who is the greatest in the kingdom of God? That's coming from the disciples. But then he picks up a child. But then can you imagine, the humility that is being required of one to get to the point of being as naive as a child, regardless of how much you know.
That is exactly the purpose.
Exactly, the question of giving to Caesar, all right? It's a question that was meant to trap him. But look at how he flips it back to the people. And they were amazed. They were filled with awe of this person who knew so much, yet was a man like them, but claimed to be God, but actually is or was God. All right. I am just looking at these examples of being in Jesus' classroom, and I'm thinking perhaps we need a reformist to our education who looks at things this way, who looks at foundations this way. One is not afraid that the consumers of any education system will become freedom fighters, right? One who will not fear that an education system must not be structured or created to control anyone, but it should be a freeing one. It should be full of love to free those who receive it so that they can become co-creators with God. And that's what Jesus is doing here. Typically, this is what Jesus is doing. Imagine Jesus is challenging his disciples to go and provide food for over 5,000 people. He's giving them the chance, the opportunity to co-create with him. And even when they are challenged, he is not discouraged by it because he knows they will. They will not be able to do it. So he does it in their presence for them to see the power of God in providing for all our needs. And so we're going to need people who will reimagine the education that reminds us of who we are, that essentially we are co-creators with God. And we must not fear that the people that we teach will become better than us and even invoke or call upon freedom fighting. That a revolution might arise out of our classrooms. I'm going to end by quoting the revolution that happened, actually one that ended apartheid in South Africa. Anyone with an idea of who actually drove the freedom fighting that ended apartheid in South Africa?
Can you please come again?
Anyone with an idea of who actually drove the revolution that ended apartheid regime in South Africa? Who are the forefront?
Mwalimu, may I give a comment? I don't wish to respond to that.
Yes.
Yes, just I think the discussion in class today is very, very helpful, and particularly for us in this class. And even if we have young parents, I think they'll find it very, very beneficial in that we should then be able to understand that the way our children are born, that they are able really to socialize and learn more broadly. And if guided very well, that they themselves can reach the pinnacle of wherever they want to go. That the things which constrain them are barriers which can easily be reduced, and education to be made that very free and open, but based on certain human values. I think you've emphasized that. And so there are things which I think as the class would be encountering in the practical world, what we call the real world, we ourselves should dissociate from them. I'll mention just a few. For example, making your child think that you can take advantage over others. for their benefit. Two, making your child to know that you're participating in buying exams so that they can learn exams and pass. There are many things which I can mention there. Just bringing these younger ones with a sense of justice would enable them really to be what Molimo is likening to the revolution in class, because knowledge and education essentially is revolutionary, because it will enable everybody who goes through the class to understand that they can change the situation that keeps people in poverty, that keeps others in ill health when they can easily acquire knowledge. So I just wanted to point out at that thing.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, and again, you're reiterating exactly that, that it's an education system that's going to decriminalize the soul of the nation. Yeah. Othello, as we come to a close.
Yes, Dr. I think one of my persons I will name there, maybe I could be wrong, is Mandela. Even though he was in jail for 27 years, he had this kind of impact on the world. And he was actually described as a celebrated prisoner of conscience, a prisoner of political prisoners, the most celebrated political prisoner in the world. And it's because of this that the leader of South Africa at the time, Pete Botha, being under intense pressure from the rest of the world, especially the African continent and also USA. Britain was somehow reluctant. They were giving excuses, but the force from the rest of the world and Europe forced this man, Pete Botha, to let Mandela out of prison. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Othello. And you all are mentioning good political figures here. Even Paul Amata mentions Daniel Malan. But did you know that at the forefront, the greatest pushers of freedom in the apartheid regime of South Africa or against it were students? It was actually students.
Yes, that's true. The Soweto uprising.
Absolutely. And to this date, for those of you who've been able to visit that country, there's a monument raised to remember in Salem the massacre that happened, where I forget how many of them, but lots of them were butchered.
That is Sharpeville.
By police. You know,
Sharpeville massacre.
Yes, exactly. So where did students learn all this from? It was from an education that was counter what the colonial education wanted them to be like.
Oh, sorry.
It was actually the very opposite of what they intended. Okay. It was the students. Yes, Eugene Situma, thanks for that. It was the students who actually did it. Leave alone the Sarafina movie. That's just an enactment of the same. It doesn't even scratch the surface of how deeply revolutionary the education system was that led students on the streets. Okay, having said enough was enough to live in their home country, yet under separation, under separatist philosophies like that, segregationist philosophies. All right. Anyway, we can we get there? Can we fix it? I'm not saying that we train kids to go to the streets, that's not my point here, but to free people to think. Free people to think. And somebody mentioned Ngugi wa Thiong'o. While that might have been the case then, dare we not think that that is over? If there emerges another Ngugi wa Thiong'o today, you see the similar response, and treatment as it was for his case. Okay, I'd like to bring this class to a close, and I want to thank you all for your wonderful contribution.